In the darkness we were waiting, without hope or without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes, to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till the stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, all the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the Church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not faint. By His blood and in His name, in His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Oh, praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
Let me turn the mic on. There we go. Man, that one lyric, Jesus, for our sake you died. Man, that's so powerful. I was
tearing up, and that wasn't just because she's my future wife. I was proud of her, but just the power behind that song. Well, I wanted to go ahead and start by saying Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. I know there's typically in most families, if you have siblings or stuff, you kind of understand the sibling rivalry. And I just wanted to point out to Jacob, my brother, that he's not on a pulpit getting to say Happy Mother's Day to our moms. So I think I win this year. But no, in all seriousness, I appreciate my mom specifically, just how they raised me and as parents and the example that they've shown me. So, yeah, without getting all touchy-feely right there. But no, it's a special day. It's one of those things that my message, Brother Mike did tell me that I was going to be preaching, or asked me if I wanted to preach on Mother's Day. And like he said, it's one of those cool opportunities that your mother gets to hear you and get to have that prideful moment that's her son. But it was also, he was like, if you want to preach on a mother, you can. And I didn't go that direction. So, but I'm going to be in 1 Samuel 17, if you want to turn there with me. And this is a story that has been, you've probably, if you've grown up in church, you've heard this story just so many times. It's David and Goliath. And we're not really focusing on the David and Goliath point of the story. We're focusing mainly on one verse, but we're going to start in verse 28. So if you would stand with me for the reading of the word. Yeah. So 1 Samuel 17, and 33. It says, Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been a fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep." This is the verse that we're going to be focusing on. It's 34, but I'll read that again. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to it. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. So I'm going to pray over this word, and then we'll start. Dear Lord, thank you so much for just this time. Thank you for the mothers in this room and the mothers who have impacted us in our lives. And Lord, I pray that as we go through your word, God, I pray that you shut my mouth. You not allow me to speak my own words, but God, it be your words that are poured through me, that I am just a vessel for you, to be used by you. And Lord, just give me the words to say. And Lord, I pray that I touch hearts tonight and we don't leave this place unchanged. We pray all this in your name. Amen. You may be seated. So we know the story of David and Goliath. Just some stats. Goliath was approximately 9'9" inches. If you know anything about basketball, Shaquille O'Neal, that's taller than Shaq. And just a bigger dude than Shaq. We think Shaq is just, or I think Shaq is just like this huge dude. But Goliath was just it's the reason why he's called a giant. And when the Philistines were coming in, they used Goliath more as an intimidation factor. They were ready to fight, but for the most part, no one was willing to fight because he was a giant, and no one had the willingness to even put their life at stake for their country like this. But earlier in there, Saul did promise some blessings if someone did deliver them from the Philistines. And basically, he promised great riches, his daughter, and all the perks of being in the royal family. And kind of probably the best perk of them all that we probably all would like is he promised a lifetime tax exemption for him and his family. So no April 15th for him anymore. So, I mean, that's something that we would all want. We may also, if we were posed, if that's all it took to get out of taxes was to fight a giant, I mean, we may give it a fighting shot for no taxes. No, but David was a small boy, and Goliath, he was a big dude and ready to fight. I mean, like it said, he's grown up training for a fight like this to deliver his country and defend this country against the Israelites, and just in war, just in general. And it's kind of cool. A little small detail in this is it says that David chose 5 stones, chose 5 smooth stones. And in 2 Samuel 21, we learned that Goliath had 4 brothers. And so David was ready to fight the family if need be. But that never came to fruition. But it was kind of the just-in-case stones that he didn't ever use. But I've got 3 points that we see in this, just in this passage kind of before the fight with David and Goliath. And one is we are placed in situations for a reason. And that reason being to bring honor and glory to God. And so we need to get to the point where we are willing to fight for our God. I think in the world that we live in with darkness, I mean, Brother Mike was talking about the Roe v. Wade thing going on right now. I think we're kind of seeing the start of a stand. There's other issues that are kind of coming up that's ideally starting to turn for the better, but this country's never going to get better until Christians take their stand against the darkness. And this isn't like a political talk. This isn't anything for us to rally up and go take the streets to go strike or anything. But it is something that this world is filled with darkness. And the way to combat darkness is to introduce the light. And in Matthew, we are called the light. We are called the light of the world. We are called to be the light. And so it starts with us. It starts with one person stepping up, and it spreads like wildfire. Any awakening or revival in this country has started with small groups, and it just spreads like wildfire. But we have to fight. But David had all these perks that was going to be given to him if he took down Goliath. But that's not why he fought Goliath. He fought for God's sake. He fought. If we back up a couple verses, it says, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." And earlier, it talks about how Goliath is taking a stand against God, God's people. And that's really, Israel is kind of the back thought. His friends and family, that's not as big of an issue for David. David's worried about God. David's worried about God's reputation for his life. And now, and that's what we can learn from David is we need to be passionate enough that we are going to fight for God. Again, that's not even a big, it doesn't have to be on a big scale. It can even be just fighting as in going out of your comfort level. We are called to go and make disciples of all nations in Matthew 28. I think if anyone in this, or if I told everyone to raise their hand if they thought it was easy to go and make disciples of all nations, I don't know how many hands I would have. It's not super easy. It's not a hard process, but it's hard to step out. But God calls us to go. But often our reason for not stepping out in faith is because of excuses. We make an excuse of we don't know enough, or fear of rejection, or any sort of things. I'm in that same boat. I see going out of all nations is not going. It doesn't have to be going out in 2 different countries. There's our neighbors or our grocery store clerks or whatever. They need Jesus too. There are lost people at our doorsteps, and we are just okay with that. And I think that's a problem. We make excuses. One thing for me, I make the excuse of being too busy a lot of times. I think a lot of us fall into that category. I mean, for me, my life has just been moving super rapidly. I got engaged, then got a new job, and then bought a house, about to get married. But then I'm under this delusion that for some reason I think once we get married, then life's going to slow down. I know that's not going to be true. I've heard from way too many more mature people that is not going to be true. And so I need to balance that a little bit. But I use busyness so often. And am I essentially just saying I'm too busy for God in that moment? I think that's kind of, again, when I say that we need to go out into the nations, I'm preaching to the choir. Like it's not easy, and I mean, it's something that Brother Mike reminds me of throughout the week is we need to go out, and even just we go out and on Tuesdays and go out and meet with people that are that have visited or something, or just people who do come to this church, and that's something that I'm not always the most willing to go do. I don't just jump out of bed and like, okay, let's go knock on people's doorsteps or knock on people's doors. But it's something that we should be doing. I preach every Wednesday. I typically am saying to the youth that our purpose in life, if you sum up the 10 Commandments or a lot of what the Bible is about, is our purpose in life as Christians is to love God and love people. That's it. And when you are going out into the nations, that's what we're doing. We're doing it because we love God. That's when you love something, you're going to obey them. When you and you obey God's commandments. And but you're also loving people enough that you're taking that knowledge of, oh, people are going to hell, and kind of not on my watch. Obviously, you can't save anyone, and we know that. But you could be someone's only chance of hearing Jesus, or someone's last chance. And when I've heard it said before in youth group one time that if you had the cure for cancer, would you share it? You'd be pretty selfish not to. But cancer is a ton better. I'm not saying cancer is any good, but cancer is a ton better than hell is. And people die and go to hell every day. And that was my first point. Didn't really plan on spending that much time on the going part. But it is something. Like, one thing that kind of does hit me a little bit is we look around this room, and yes, it's Mother's Day night, and there's people with their mothers. But a lot of our pews are empty. And Saline County is not empty. There's one event that happens each month in Benton called Third Thursday. I was out there last month, and there's just families upon families upon families just out there. And that's something that I've talked to Brother Mike, and I got the reference from actually one of the guys that Adam, who came and supported me. He's a family friend, and he goes to New Life Baptist where they have a table, and that's kind of who we were hanging out with a little bit. But it was one of those things that I was like, well, why don't we do this? If we say our heart, I talked to Brother Mike throughout the week also and say, I have a passion for these young families. I think if we all were to, if I asked you who needs to be in these pews, it's the younger generation. And there's so many of them unchurched. And there's ways to do that, and big scale like Third Thursday that I just talked about, but also on a small scale of, you probably have young families in your neighborhood, or a lot of us do. And so just go. But the second thing that we see is kind of a flip side. It's not necessarily anything that is too related to going, but in verse 34, it says, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep when a lion and bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock. I went after it, struck it, and rescued it from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it.'" So we see when we think about David, we think about kind of David and Goliath's story and on. We don't really think about too much beforehand because David was a shepherd boy. He just kept sheep. But I was at a youth pastor conference, and I heard this spoke on, and I was like, oh, David killed a bear and a lion. Like, in my mind, like, David and Goliath had big symbolism and delivered his country from the Philistines. But this private battle that no one knew about besides maybe his family, and then now Saul and which was a king, but no one really knew about this because it wasn't out in public. But later on, this is what gives him the credibility to fight against a giant. And so when we often talk about the public victories or the public battles. But the private victories and private battles are what get us to that point. And that's almost more of a more serious thing, because these private battles, if we fail against these private battles, then that can either cripple us or that can deliver us if we do press through. And so, why did he slay a bear and a lion? It was to protect his sheep. His sheep. One of the descriptions of a sheep is vulnerable. Sheep are very vulnerable. They're kind of dumb animals, and they go wherever they're being led. And then if one wanders off, then it just wanders off, and it's kind of out to be killed. It's really kind of a defenseless animal. And that's kind of how we should start seeing our struggles and our vulnerabilities. Is if we struggle with with being faithful to our spouse, we should, let me back up. As a shepherd, shepherds know how defenseless and how vulnerable sheep really are. And they're not if they see danger, they're looking ahead. And if they see danger, they're going to veer away from danger. And that's how we should see our vulnerabilities. We should be running away from the vulnerabilities. We should flee the temptation, as it talks about in the New Testament. If we struggle with idolatry of money, creating less of a stockpile. If we struggle with infidelity, then putting yourself in less situations with the opposite sex. We should build guards around where we are not as susceptible to danger. We should be shepherds over our vulnerabilities, over our sheep. We need to protect our sheep. That's actually the title of this sermon, is we need to protect our sheep. Our sheep also, going with the Mother's Day theme, our sheep and families are children. Children are more vulnerable. This, in the same way, if actually is a story from one of our family vacations. We were in North Carolina one time, and we were hiking, and bringing up Jacob again. We were all I was older, and we were looking off the edge of the cliff, and we were just seeing how high up we were and everything. Well, Jacob's in the van trying to get out, and me and my dad are up ahead. And Jacob's like, oh, I want to see. And so he's running full speed, what is basically off the cliff. And my dad, he doesn't really know what's on the other side. He's just like, oh, a cool view. So he's running full speed, and Dad had to catch him and stop. And I mean, we see that same mentality of these sheep. They need to be reeled in. When we are tempted, we need to reel ourselves in. But that also comes with accountability. In that situation, on a more spiritual level, the accountability reeled him back in. My dad reeled him back in where danger was the side of a cliff, and my dad protected him. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to protect our sheep. Not necessarily our children. We do need to protect them. We need to protect them in sin. I say our children. I don't have children, don't worry. But we need to protect vulnerabilities in our lives. We all have a sin struggle. We all have a sin problem. Ever since we've been teaching through a big study of the 3 circles method of teaching the gospel, and we're on the brokenness and how we get from perfection to brokenness. Well, there's a perfect world that God created, and then man had basically 1 chapter of perfection, and then in the 3rd chapter we see brokenness. We see sin enter the world, and we messed up, and that's something that we've got to protect ourselves against. Us as Christians, we kind of want to see ourselves as higher than that, and that's how we should see ourselves. We should be higher than that, but we also have those struggles. There's another story that I had heard, and there's this man who had just graduated seminary, and he was just on fire for the Lord. I want to see everyone get saved. It's a great drive to have. Just everyone needs Jesus. I want to go reach the masses, and let's go. Well, he plants a church, and within his first year, he has like 500 people coming. Within his second year, he has 4,000 people coming. It just grows like a wildfire. Well, then, because he's growing, he starts getting some recognition, and people start calling on him to come preach at some revivals and stuff. Well, with this, he was traveling more, and he had a family and everything. Well, he starts cheating on his wife. This man that's in front of a mega church and preaching at these conferences is cheating, gets caught cheating on his wife. Well, his wife finds out about it and goes to the deacons of the church. And they say, okay, this is the issue. I've caught my husband cheating. Your pastor cheating on me. He needs to step down for at least a little bit, try to figure out the family. We need to get this straight. And they said, our church is growing, and people are getting saved every week. We need him here, and this is more important. And so she just storms out of there all mad, and it takes a couple weeks later, or a few weeks later, about a couple months, and she comes back to them, and she discovers that he cheated on her with another girl, but also drugs and alcohol were involved. And again, this is a pastor of a mega church, and was leading conferences, and then she goes back to the deacons and says, hey, I'm being serious. This needs to get taken care of. I'm not saying he can't be a pastor at all for the rest of his life. I'm saying we need to figure this out. We need to nip this. We need to take care of the lions and the bears in his life, the private sins. And it doesn't have to get public, but we need to deal with this. Because as I glossed over in my notes, things in the dark, when kept in the dark, grow bigger and bigger. Sin takes us deeper than we want to go, keeps us there longer than we want to be, and costs way more than we want to pay. And so she goes back to the deacons, and again they say, no, we are saved, and we are baptizing so many people. We are people are getting saved. People are getting to know the Lord. Don't you care about that? And their response, then they double down on that and say, actually, instead of him stepping down, we need you to leave the church. And she did. And in that later on, I think about 2 years later, he was still traveling the country with all these issues. With, I believe, a divorce. He was still a successful preacher. People were still calling him to preach. And he, one day, he was found in his hotel room, and he had died on drug overdose. Because of these small sins that were growing and growing and growing, because people in the church were too worried about his reputation over his character, which is another issue that society has. We value reputation. We value people's status over who they are. It killed him. And now, the thing that was keeping him going, now people aren't getting to know him through him, and people are valuing him over God. Oh, they were willing. The people at the church were more willing to split up a marriage, and they valued the church instead of urging him to deal with these vulnerabilities and the bears and the sin in his life. And so this is something that we've got to deal with, because as people, we have a sin problem. And we need to deal with it on our own, but we also need accountability. And it tells us in Galatians 6:2 to carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. God calls us to accountability. And that is what we are called to do, and that's what when you walk alongside someone, you have someone keeping you from falling off a cliff or keeping you from these sins. Because essentially, that it wasn't the verse that I was wanting to use, but when two or more are gathered, he is there also. God is also there. God never leaves us nor forsakes us. When we are in these struggles, God is still present. And it's not it's not good enough to talk about how we need to deal with these issues. We need to protect our sheep. We need to kill the lion and the bear if I don't talk about how to do that. Accountability is one part, but one thing that I want to heed away from the world, when in this, I kind of equate Saul dressing David in his own tunic and the armor that he's not used to. And I kind of equate that to how the world tries to dress us. How the world says, okay, if you struggle with this sin, well, you can do this. Coping mechanisms. People run to sinful things. People run to drugs and alcohol. People run to other people. Or if you're unhappy in your marriage, people say, okay, go find someone else. That's not how God designed it. But then there's also good things that coping mechanisms that people use, like exercise or going to accountability. Like, these are good things, but they're not when you're going to those over God. We need to start addressing our sin to God. We need to be finding ourselves at the altar. We need to be placing our sin in front of the Lord. And that's when, just like in that story, when we have sin that is not dealt with, it just grows and grows and grows. But kind of another call is when you see a brother or a sister stumbling or in sin. Don't go at them pointing out the speck in their eye when you have a log in your own eye, but go to them in accountability. Because that's what we're called to do. Iron sharpens iron. We are called to walk alongside each other because God wired us for companionship. God wired us to walk alongside others. And so maybe you're here and you don't know the Lord. And kind of the way I like to see this is when we talk about the lions and bears and the sheep, Jesus was the ultimate shepherd. Because Jesus did not necessarily just fight the Satan, which he did. And the good news, he's already won. But he also sacrificed himself so that we can win. But we don't win on our own. We win because he won. And we are the sheep that are vulnerable to sin, and we need to recognize those issues. And so, as we wrap up, we'll have an invitation, and what I'm going to ask is there's three kinds of people. There's either people who do not know the Lord and who aren't saved, and if you need that, me and Brother Mike are going to be at the front, and we're more than happy to lead you to set that straight. Because like I said, especially if you're in this church, we are wanting to see you choose to follow God, choose to place your trust in God. But if you have, there's another call. Look around these pews. There is emptiness. And I'm not saying when you go out to tell people about Christ, I am not wanting you to go and tell people about Christ solely to fill up a room. Not to fill up Trinity Baptist Church, but to fill up the church. To fill up God's house. To see people get to know Christ and go to heaven. To place their trust in Jesus. To care about people so much, to love them and to see them grow. To see them grow. So you either come and as a response, if you need to get saved, set that straight. Second, either pray at your seat or pray, come up here and place at the altar, or just think of some names of people that are in your life, of people who you know that aren't saved. And pray for them. Pray for God to open up an opportunity, first of all, to minister. But second, for them to come to know Christ. And then third, if you have those bears and lions in your lives trying to consume your vulnerabilities and these sins that aren't dealt with, deal with that tonight. Nail that down tonight. Place that at the feet of God. And do it placing pride aside. Do it with humility. Do it without anyone else caring at all about what you're doing. Because you need to get this right with God. Because as we see, when we have sin that is undealt with, darkness begins to grow in your life, and Satan just loves that. And Satan comes to devour. So as we pray, just pray for how you need to respond. We're about to have a time of invitation, but just pray for how God is calling you. And if no one moves, that's fine. I'm not here to get everyone to the altar, whatever. But pray for how God is calling you to respond.